afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Sunju Jo, who is doctorate candidate in piano performance at UT Austin. And thank you for being here. Really, your presence means a lot. And my lecture recital title is The Framing Silence in Hyo-shin Autumn Study and Five Friends, based on an analytical approach through East Asian aesthetics. So before I start, I really want to extend my special thanks to Hyo-shin composer Hyo-shin. So for graciously permitting this research, and for her willing and generous support, and for all my committees people. Without your guidance and support, I can't believe I can make this lecture and the research. I really appreciate it. So in this presentation, I explore how silence in Hyo-shin music can be understood, not as just merely absence of a sound, but as an active musical element that shapes time, space, and listening. So here is the table of content. So I will begin a short introduction and short overview of silence in Western musical thought. Then I will move to Hyo-shin piano writing and introduce the two works, Autumn Study and Five Friends. After that, I will explain the East Asian aesthetic concept I use as analytical tools for my preference guide, especially Ma, Liu Bai, or Yeobek, and Yeon. So finally, I will discuss silence techniques in these two works and suggest preference approaches based on these ideas. Okay, why silence, why not? So she is a contemporary Korean-American composer who writes for both Western and East Asian instruments. So her music often brings different sound worlds together because she combined these two kind of instruments together in her composition. We can hear this in her music as well, in gestures such as pentatonic motion, grace notes, figures, short rhythmic cells, and moments of rest. So for me, these pictures may suggest an East Asian sensibility. I thought about this. And more importantly for my argument, they often draw attention to silence. In Na's music, silence is not just empty space. It shapes the music through rest, decay, resonance, and stillness. So the central question of this lecture is, can this silence be understood as an Asian element in her compositional language, rooted in East Asian aesthetics? Before moving on, I want to introduce a few key concepts for better understanding of this lecture that will be really important throughout this lecture as well. In particular, I will use terms such as silence, musical time, listening a little bit differently. So we can look at the silence. Silence is a musical element rather than mere absence. So I consider the time and the intervals and the breath or everything as a silence. And the musical time in this lecture is continuity and pulse shaped beyond meter or bar lines. So the timing will be the musical timing lecture. And the listening is the perception extended through rest, decay, and after sound. And one more key concept is East Asian aesthetic space. So I will explain more later about this more detailed. But here I want to suggest this Ma, Liu Bai, Yuin, or Yeon. Here, Ma is Japanese concept Ma, and means interval, gap, or space between. And Liu Bai or Yeobek is Chinese concept. Liu Bai means living white. And then Korean concept Yeobek means remaining blank, white space. And Yuin and Yeon is musical counterpart of Liu Bai and Yeobek. So it means remaining sound, which refer to lingering resonance and after sound. So next things, I really want to suggest this silence in Western musical thought. Silence often considered as just merely absence, in lots of cases, but some scholars in Western, they consider this silence a really important element in music, and other philosophy and paintings a lot. So here, George Steiner, who is actually considered his silence as absent. So I have three people here. I want to briefly introduce their opinions. So George Steiner treats certain forms of modern art as messageless and therefore mute, equating meaninglessness with a fall into silence. And Ian Bent, British musical scholar, observes that the terminology used to discuss silence can imply it is little more than a non-entity, a blank canvas on which notes are placed. The last one, Adam Jaworski, he says silence is not taken as meaningful space in its own right. It is treated as a leg that must be completed by the listener, as if empty space were something to overcome rather than something to inhabit. Second, unlike those who understood silence as a lack of sound, they recognized it as a living, dynamic form of time. The early example of this appears in Louis Couperin's Measured Preludes. In these works, time is not controlled by strict meter. Instead, it is shaped by gesture, grouping, and the performance on sense of flow. So silence is not just empty space between sounds, but part of flexible musical process. And with Debussy, silence becomes closely connected to spacing and resonance. What matters is not only the note itself, but also the space around it, and the sound that lingers after it. In this way, silence becomes part of the sound world itself. And Victor Zuccarcando pushes this idea further by arguing that pulse continues even through rest, so silence does not stop the music. It allows musical time to continue internally. And for John Cage, he's really famous about the silence in music. He says silence is perceptual frame. So it changes the way we listen and making us aware of sounds that we would normally ignore. So Morton Feldman, also related to the John Cage, in turn treats silence as a compositional tool, and through controlled duration and resonance, he shows that silence can shape musical form from within. So, and from here, silence can also be understood as relational space. This is really related to the East Asian aesthetic. In Toru Takemitsu, this appears through the Japanese concept of ma, not an empty gap, but a meaningful interval where sound, time, and listening exist in relation. And Francois Julien, drawing on Chinese dot, similarly it emphasizes continuity and silent transformation, where change happens gradually and from within. So in the end, my point is that silence is not just simply emptiness. So I related to the active time and the relational space. So it is an active, temporal, and relational force in my lecture. So now I want to dive into her music and piano writing. So Hyo-shin is a composer and a Korean composer born in Seoul in 1959 and based in San Francisco now. And she awarded the Korean National Composer Prize twice, and she accepts major commissions from lots of institutions. And then the main character is she used the traditional sound words as contemporary musical language, and she builds connections across Korean and North American contemporary music networks through her music. So before turning to silence more specifically, I want to highlight some broader features of Na's piano writing. I will talk about her silent technique a little later, but these are the general characteristics of her musical language, not yet the specific silence techniques I will discuss later. So I want to focus on 5 aspects. So pulse without bar lines, phrasal suspension, poetic imagination, resonance and decay, and gesture and release. So I want to explain more here. So in her music, So although tempo is marked, regular bar lines or meter are often absent in her music. As a result, pulse does not rely on conventional metric organization, but unfolds in a more open way. Another feature is the way Na shapes musical phrases through suspension and pause. In variations, her piano music, for example, a long pause appears between two fast sections. Rather than simply breaking in flow, it creates a moment of suspension that marks a boundary and prepares what follows. And the next one, this one is much more interesting to me actually, personally. So she inspired by poetry, but not by translating poetic form or rhythm directly into music. Instead, poetry offers her a way of thinking and feeling, which she transforms into musical expression. So in works such as Autumn Study and Song of Disillusionment, poetry functions less as a former model than a source of insight and sensibility. In Autumn Study, poetry provides an emotional image of silence rather than a formal structure to be imitated. So she literally said about the "Let me walk through silence" from Anna Kamienska's poem. So it is really dark, and then the poem name is "The Prayer Will Be Answered." So silence is really, really quiet, and then she can think about the depth of the silence. So she borrowed this emotion to her music, and she wrote this Autumn Study. And similarly, she borrowed the poems from the Shigam. Your wandering of mind within deep, mysterious stillness. Also the main emotion of her Song of Disillusionment. So this was really interesting to me, personally. So I really want to share these ideas with you. The next one is the resonance and decay. So the end of the note is often not the end of the musical event. Instead, resonance continues to shape the musical continuity. So here, decay extends the phrase beyond the written note, grace notes, and pedal blend into linear resonance. Silence emerges as resonant, not abrupt absence in her music. And the last one is gesture and release. And here, so now often shapes musical endings through gesture rather than closure. In markings such as release gradually, the phrase does not end firmly, but gentle withdraws, hands and pedal. So this gives the music an open and breath-like quality. I want to dive into two music, Autumn Study and Five Friends right now. So I want to introduce Autumn Study first. So Autumn Study is inspired by three elements. I already said about the Anna Kamienska's poem, so that emotion. And second one is the season of autumn. And the last one is an autumnal stage of her life. So she emphasizes quiet entrance rather than dramatic release in this piece. And silence is not a clean stop, but as a space where sound thinks out, lingers, and dissolves. So the performer can shape, decay, release, and resonance between gestures here. The next one is Five Friends. She inspired by Korean poem Olga. Olga means literally five friends by Son Do-yoon. Draws on the five elements of nature, so water, rock, pine tree, bamboo, and moon. And then she evokes ideals of steadfastness and consistency, resilience, contentment, and wordless integrity. So here she didn't say this part is water, this part is rock, but she used the different characteristic fast section and the slow sections as an alternation. So we can feel really flows of the nature together. But I worked hard to find a really specific part, but I think I felt really flow of the nature, so I couldn't find it. So, but you can feel when you listen, because this is a published piece actually, unfortunately. So I can feel really, really like quiet and then flowing and then based on your back later. Yes, and she uses visual stretch of the high register. This is really important in this piece. And silent note, which is her own notation to sustain and prolong resonance. So why these two pieces? I chose these two pieces because they share a similar poetic background, but realize silence in very different ways. Autumn Study approaches silence through decay and dissolution, while Five Friends explore it through the distance, like in the high register, and the resonance after the note, and the silent note, which is her own notation. The key line of this study is that East Asian philosophy, so aesthetic, offers one interpretive lens, but it does not define and exhaust her music as a whole. So in particular, I argue that her treatment of silence parallels the logic of Ma as a relational interval and Liu Bai as meaningful emptiness. So these concepts allow a more precise reading than conventional Western vocabulary alone. The Ma, what is this Ma? So Ma is an important idea in Japanese aesthetics. It means the meaningful space between things. So in visual art, it is not just blank space, but a space of waiting, transition, and even anticipation. In music, Ma can be understood as a space between sounds and gestures. And what makes this space meaningful is that it connects one event to the next. It allows the previous sound to linger while preparing us for what follows. So Ma helps us understand silence as a living in between space. The next picture is Ryoanji Garden in Japan. This is a really good example of Ma because it helps us notice the space between things. So as you can see, the garden is really, really simple. And then when you look at the stone, and then our sight and our eyes moving from this first stone to the next stone, and the next stone. And then when we move our eyes, we can perceive these intervals between the stones. So it's already meaningful because we perceive these intervals. And then, oh, this is shorter distance, this is longer. And then it has like, oh, yes, this feeling. So it'll be really helpful for understanding about the Ma. In this way, the empty looking space becomes important. It shapes how we look, how we move our attention, and how we experience time. A similar idea in music can be felt in no drama, a traditional Japanese theater form. It's really, really slow movement, actually. Here, Ma appears through slow movement, spatial distance, and carefully controlled timing. As you can see, we have really limited characters on stage, and their acting and their motion is really slow. So, and in this, I think as you watch, notice especially the movement of the percussionist. So this is my favorite part. When the arms open widely and move slowly, we sense a longer wait before the next drum sound. And when the gesture becomes quicker, we feel a shorter interval. So I want to show this video. the standing motion because this is too slow. Yeah. So I think the main character also moving really, really slow in this music. Okay. Yes. So here, and in this example, what matters is not only the action itself, but the interval around it. The percussionist movement makes the interval perceptible even before the sounds arrives. So slow, extended gestures create a sense of waiting, and while quicker gestures suggest a shorter gap between the sound and the silence. In this way, ma is felt not as empty space, but as a flexible and expressive interval shaped by timing, movement, and anticipation. So next one is liu bai or yobek. Liu bai is Chinese concept and yobek is Korean concept, but I use this word samely because it has the same meaning actually. So it means deliberate blank or remaining space. And in Taoist thought, it is understood as an open and generative space, one that allows relation, movement, and transformation. So yobek is not passive emptiness, but a meaningful space that gives shape and depth to what appears within it. So if I said about the ma is relate to the intervals and then time, but this yobek is the empty space itself has the meaning in this yobek. Here I have another example here. So the kuibashi shrimp is a clear example of liu bai or yobek. So what do you think about these shrimps picture? The shrimp are painted carefully, but the water around them is left blank, right? And there are no waves, no ripples, and no plants. Instead, the blank space helps us imagine the water and feel that it is there. In this way, the empty space is not just the background, it shapes how we see the shrimp and understand the whole picture. This is why liu bai is important. The blank space is not just empty, but a meaningful part of the image. Another painting came from the Korean painters. So it is in the late 15th century. So Johnson Lee's landscape painting offers another example of yobek. In his painting, mist between the mountain and this tree and river, you can see the mist here. So this mist and open space do not make the scene feel unfinished. So this is even though this is white space. Instead, they shape how we see the mountains and trees. The soft mist connects what is clearly visible and what is only partly seen. So the blank space is not just empty here as well. It makes the landscape feel open, calm, and alive because of this mist. The last one is Yuin. So if liu bai helps understand meaningful blank space in painting, Yuin or Yolen helps us hear a similar idea in music. A note does not end suddenly. Its resonance continues into the silence that follows. Because of this lingering sound, the silence does not feel empty. It still feels connected to the note. In this way, Yuin can be understood as a musical expression of yobek. And now I want to show one of the examples of Byung-gi Hwang's gayagum performance. Gayagum is Korean instrument, traditional instrument. As you listen, notice how the sound does not end immediately. It lingers and fades gradually. Also notice that even the same pitch is not always played in exactly the same way. Because of that, each note leaves a slightly different resonance behind. So let's listen to this performance. same like flocking the string. So it was interesting to me for explaining this Hyo-shin. So yeah, so next one is, so I really want to talk about the silent techniques in Hyo-shin music here. So far I talked about the East Asian aesthetics, Ma, Liu Bai, or Yabe, and Hyo-shin, Yu-in here. But now I want to introduce these 4 silence techniques in her music, Autumn Study and 5 Friends. The first one is visual spacing as a cue for breath and pause. And the next one is sectional silence using double bar lines and implied szechuan. And silence as resonance, the layering quality of sound. The last one is voice-specific rest, textural thinning in the polyphonic texture. So I want to see how this aesthetic can apply to the music practically. The first one is the visual spacing as a cue for the breath here. So here, notation does not only show pitch, it also shows movement. So wide spacing shapes breath and timing and pause, and silence appears in the between gestures. So in other words, the score can be read as a kind of spatial field of performance. So I really want to see what happens in the Autumn Study. So here, the wide leaps, so silence created through motion in this passage. So the wide leap from C6, here, C6 down to the C2, and back, and makes the interval between notes both visible and audible. So even within a very short gap, the gesture creates expectancy and sharpens the sense of pulse. So in this way, the interval can be understood as ma, while the visual openness of the gap may also be read through liu bai. So in performance, the grace note should connect to the main tone rather than sound detached, rather than this. Almost just one action, and I use relaxed circular arm motion, and during the rest, I move toward the next note in an arch. So C6 to C2, I have moved my arch motion here, so the sounds like. So at the same time, the left hand must keep its text clear so that the pulse remains stable. So really stable pulse. In this way, the rest becomes a meaningful interval, which is ma, shaped by motion and anticipation. So we can, when I play the C6 note, and then I'm using my arm, so we can anticipate the C2. She's going to the C2. So this also already meaningful intervals between C6 to C2. And the next one is 5 Friends. So I don't want to explain too much before I move to like really specific things. I really wonder, what is your first impression of this part? I wonder, yes. This is actually, for me, several things stands out immediately. We see very high notes written out in letter line rather than with ABA signs. We also see the line moving gradually higher while some of the notes value become longer. So the first part, I looked at so many letter lines, so we need to count really well. And the next one is the note value is getting longer actually here. And at one point, even the left hand shift into treble clef, which makes the register space even more expanded. So visually, the passage already suggests height, distance, and physical reach. It does not simply look fast. It looks stretched upward. In that sense, the notation itself helps us sense ma, not as pause, but as the felt distance between points. Yeah. Here now I'd like to explain this passage through two short patterns, focusing on how it would actually perform that. So in the first part, the music remains very high register, so the performer must read directly from the lecture line, and rather than relying on ABA sign. So that already creates tension. And because there are several leaves within this register, I do not play them as sudden jumps. So here I have already like this octave, but I don't want to play just a little random note. So, but I want to feel using my arms more, and then like that, but without vibrato actually. Yes. So here, instead I prepare each shift slightly in advance. Keep the hand oriented toward the next note, and let the arm guide the motion. In this way, the listener hears not only the height of the notes, but also the distance between them. In the second pattern, in the second system, the challenge is different. Left hand gradually moves higher, so I shape it as a one continuous rising motion rather than separate events. So here, rather than this, so I want to feel to make this a little bit harder reach out here. So in the performance, and at the same time, I keep the basic pulse stable. The feeling of distance comes not from slowing down, but from preparation and my arm movement, spacing, and the shaping of the longer notes. So in performance, the point is very practical. In the first pattern, prepare and guide leaves clearly in the high register with arms. In the second pattern, shape the left hand accent as one connected motion and let the last arriver feel slightly hard one. This passage mainly reveals Ma as the music makes distance perceptible through leaves, accent, and the performance physical preparation and motion. And the next part is sectional silence. I want to briefly talk about these. And here, she used the double bond lines mainly to mark tempo change, actually. But the performer can feel these like double bond lines, not merely just counted breaths. It's like a boundary between two sections. So performers can shape the in-between feeling between these two parts, so the ma works as a meaningful interval here. So in the performance guide, so I treat the boundary as a reset, not an empty stop for the setting of the tempo, new tempo. And I do not prepare the next gesture too early, and we can anticipate like, oh, she starts the next section. So I wait a little bit, and then I need to reset the tempo again, and then I start the next part. And let the resonance settle, and I begin the next section as a fresh start at that time. And I want to move on the resonance part. So here, silence does not simply stop sound here. Long ties create gradual disappearance rather than abrupt cutoff. And the resonance and decay extend into the following silence. And non-silent note marks a resonant rest rather than a new pitch. So the following silence is not empty, but resonant. So in the autumn study, you can see the long tie here. The silence should feel like a continuation of resonance. I begin with the full pedal at the first attack, then gradually release it as the sounds thin out. Here, and the pedal motion stays very gentle, and I avoid any sudden break before the rest. Even the body remains restrained so that the after sound can be heard. So here, release gradually, then I release my hands and pedal gradually together. And then rest. Yes. So here, and then I consider these as this resonance. And the next one is 5 friends. So now silent note is her own notation here with the asterisk here. It does not add a new pitch. Instead, it marks as rest, a rest that remains acoustically like alive. Resonance and overtones continue into the silence, so the silence still carries the after image of sound. So now uses what she calls silent note, written over the rest. As you can see, the pink color one. And these do not ask for a new attack. Instead, they suggest that the rest should still carry the resonance of the previous chord. So let me demonstrate that in the left hand actually. Left hand is really important here. The first triplet, the dark blue one, should be clear. And then while the next is softer, almost like an echo. Because the last notes in tied into the next group, and the second triplet feels like a continuation rather than a new beginning. And we have the piano and the pianissimo dynamics here, but the pattern must still remain rhythmically and melodically clear. So the rest here are also not all the same. So these should be really clear. And then here we have silent note. So here I'm continuing this note, even I didn't play the new action here. So in other words, there are 2 kinds of silence here. One that separates, one that sustains. So in this passage, Yobek functions as a resonance space, allowing the previous sound to linger even through the rest. So it should be really accurate. And we're staying we're staying in this pattern, but here, so the last note is not really projecting, but we can still. So this is one of the anticipation of this part. So I want to play this part entirely here for better demonstration. So the last one is final technique is voice-specific rest and textural dealing. In voice-specific rest, silence does not stop the whole texture. It selectively rethrows certain layers, making the remaining voices clearer and allowing accent itself to shape the balance, spacing, and timbre of the texture. So here you can see the second half one. So we have 4 parts, but it is related to the long time, and then suddenly we have just outer voice here. So here in autumn study, this one is autumn study, inner voices gradually disappear, leaving a thinner texture. The outer voice should sound light and transparent. What matters here is not only the notes, but also the space inside the sound. So here, rather than releasing the pedal really suddenly, I let it fade gradually so that the texture thins from within and the fuller chord can dissolve naturally into silence. So when we catch the last note, the pedal should be fully released. So here, release gradually and here. And even in 5 friends, the opposite happens. So the score suggests a 4-voice texture sanely, but the outer voice remaining silent. The performer should not fill that space by over-projecting the inner voice. When I project this inner voice too much, it's like just, okay, there are beautiful melody, and we cannot expect where is beyond that. What is there? And then instead, inner voice should stay soft and restrained so that the blank frame remains perceptible. So in this passage, what matters here is that not separate the part through dynamics. So as you can see, you have mezzo forte in the outer voice, and then pianissimo inner voice here. Because each voice has its own dynamic identity, the listener can hear the texture as layered rather than blended. This is especially important in the outer voices. They appear only occasionally, but those isolated notes makes us continue to feel the presence of the whole outer line, even if we have just only one single note with like an accent or the staccato. So they remain part of the voice and help keep its presence alive. In performance, the dynamic contrast must stay clear so that even brief outer voice notes can project the larger 4-part frame. So even in the rest, the outer voice should still be felt, so that when it returns, it sounds like a continuation of the same line. So here, the sounds like so I keep my inner voice really soft, even here is longer note, but this outer voice a little bit has to be really projecting within the mezzo forte dynamics. So this is where East Asian aesthetics becomes especially helpful. So through Ma, silence is not just a gap, but a relational shaped by timing, movement, and expectation. Through Liu Bai, silence is not empty, but a meaningful space that gives shape to what appears within it. So across these examples, the performer's task is not to overcome silence, but to keep its space, resonance, and expressive force alive. Yeah. So here also another example, the example here, and then it has a little bit different dynamics. The outer voice is pianissimo, and the inner voice is forte, and then pianissimo. So she wrote like really specific dynamics each voices. She really wanted to listen each voices in the 4-voice texture. Yeah. So to conclude, this study has argued that silence in Hyo-shin's piano music is not simply no sound. It is a musical material that shapes time, space, and listening. Across autumn study and 5 friends, I identified 4 recurring silence techniques: visual spacing, sectional silence, resonance as a silence, and voice-specific rest within thinning texture in the polyphonic texture. And to explain why these techniques feel so central in this music, I used Ma, Liu Bai, and Yuen as practical analytical tools. So from a performance perspective, this means that silence must be actively shaped. The performer's task is not only to produce sound, but also to shape silence. So the final point of this lecture is really simple. In Na's music, silence is not a background. It is one of the main ways the music breathes, moves, and thinks. So these are the reference, and I want to play one of the pieces from her, like Autumn Study and then 5 Friends. I want to play the Autumn Study right now. 3 minutes. So if you have any questions, let me know.
Yeah, so I noticed there's a big visual component to silence, both in the artwork and the performance you showed us, but also you mentioned the movements of your arms across the keys to show distance. I'm wondering if you were preparing this for a recorded performance that wasn't visual. Would you do anything different, or would you maybe like augment the distances with time? How does that work into the performance?
Yeah, I think the visual things also one of the part of the performance. I think in my lecture, so I think it's actually in the recording we are only listening just sound, so it's not really projecting really well. But I think I want to consider this is the one thing, so gestures and then sound all together, and then we can make this like really silence technique, something like that, in our performance. So I think it should be together in my lecture. So in the recording, I think this is really good point, really interesting questions. But I think in my lecture, I think this is a little about the live performance rather than the recording project. Yes.
Do you think at the end it seemed that it's a rather abrupt ending? Do you consider the music to be continuing through the silence? And
Yes.
if so, does it ever come to an end?
Right, because I have 3 8 notes at the end in this piece. So I'm playing silence actually, the rest. So I think I feel the music is still going on within this rest. So yeah, I tried. Yes.
I have one more question.
Yeah, sure.
Similar to what she was saying at the end, when I'm teaching students, especially younger students, I have a really hard time getting them to be patient enough to show that silence. Do you have any suggestions on how to teach a kid this concept of to help them be more patient and to listen to the silence?
That's really interesting questions. Yeah, I think when I perform this piece, at least I'm thinking about the sound. No, what is the next? So I think I didn't think about the ending of the note and of the piece, and then it's like, and then I'm listening the sound. So it's really mind control. It's not really projected, yeah, visually. But I'm thinking of like, and the lingering sound in my ear. I tried this one, so I think after the ending note of the A, actually A note, A, and is continue with that one, and then maybe it'll be the one of the another new start or ending for sure. But I think I'm thinking about the what is the next. I don't know what is the next, but I'm thinking about the what follows. So you can think about this. But just for me, at least, I'm thinking about the next piece, in this piece at least. So that would be helpful. Expectation, just what is the next, what follows. About that, yeah. Yes?
I was thinking about some other, earlier, we talked about how Beethoven uses silence.
Yes.
Another one that came to mind is just before the coda in the F minor ballade.
Mm-hmm.
After the big chorus,
Yeah.
that's a really interesting one, and I think that I've performed the piece a lot, and but without knowing what you're talking about, just sensing this is a very meaningful silence. But I've never been really clear on what it needs to be. I have a sense of how long I want it to be, but I'm not totally sure that I know what I want it to convey. And so I'm thinking that, with your insight, I'm thinking if I were to perform that, I would have a little more of a sense of what does that silence mean, and how to listen to it. As you're talking about.
Dragon. No, yeah.
Yeah, see, that would make a little bit more sense as an audio only. Because
Yeah, right.
you hear all those different resonances and after sounds and everything. Although it's certainly interesting to watch. But
I think because
there's
yeah.
more of what we call music in that.
Because mine is more philosophical like concept in my lecture, so that we perceive this interval. This is already meaningful. Actually, the Hyo-in and Yu-in is literally just musical elements, so you can listen the resonance after this. So yeah, so that helps to understand the Hyo-back. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.